Hello.
I'm gonna start my speech with a preamble, so please restart your cars. I want to first start by thanking my partner and my partner. I'm gonna do this preamble for both of us, so my partner also thanks me for this very nice tournament and very fun tournament. We also would like to thank Annie's for making a lot of things possible, where she is in Calgary, and Rose for being a good partner and also a very supportive partner. Okay, for real. 1, 2. Two things in this speech. One, we think that morality is definitionally a social construct. What does this mean? What else is this? A social construct is something like art. Art did not exist before human existed. This means that art existed because we visualize something as pretty and thus we made art for it. Art does not have any value if there is no humans existing to appreciate it. The first mention then of morality was not until like thousands and billions of years of history later when the first civilizations existed. They existed because humans were there to meditate physics, to start to try to understand feelings, to understand why you have a pain in the stomach when you do something. Or, oh, what should you do in XXX situation? This means that different people have different ways of interpreting things, but also different societies have different ways of interpreting things too. This means that maybe some actions that were good in one society and seen as a world is probably something that isn't in another way. I think also that secondly, morality is relative to the circumstances that things happen, right? This notion says that moral realism is that there are true facts about what actions are right and are wrong, and what states in the world are good and bad. 3 reasons why this is true. 1, you just don't have perfect information. No human or no being on this earth has perfect information of what is good, what is bad, what is happening in these circumstances, what happened in all of the crystallization of someone's life that led to an action, what is the consequences of this? What does this actually look like? For example, if you see someone being hit in public, perhaps God will say that, I do not like being hit in public. This is probably something that is like moral realistically bad. But perhaps this guy is just into this shit. And this makes them like just really, really happy and turns them on to be like hit in public. Perhaps that some people dislike spicy food because it biologically creates a sensation of pain in your mouth. But actually, some people just really, really like it because spicy food is fun and somehow creates pleasure, right? This means that is spicy good or bad? Is eating it good or bad? We don't know. I think morality is very much not realistic. Okay, later. But secondly, I think it's just impossible to predict what your actions are going to do, or what your actions are going to do, what the consequences of it. So you don't know what objective good would happen. If you save someone, and this person ends up killing like 10 other children, or it's like, I don't know, then are you actually doing an objective good with this action, or are you actually doing like a wrong, right? I think as insofar as we don't know these things, we don't have any access to these, we should not probably judge morality based on action, but just morality based on circumstances, based on what happened with situation, which means there is no realistic thing that we're like, the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean on Earth. Hitting someone is bad. This is probably not good.
Yeah, if Earth was hit by an asteroid tomorrow and all humans died, and in a couple million years octopuses appeared to the Earth and started chattel slavery, would that be wrong?
I think that if perhaps that okay, so what is the morality here? It is like, is the world being made moral? I think that if possibly, in self-million years, humans evolved to become worse than child slavers and animal slavers, I think that this is probably bad. So is humanity being good bad? Probably, maybe not, right? This is like, we just don't know. We just aren't able to predict the consequences of each action will lead to, which means we aren't able to say if XX action is actually good or bad, right? But I think also the reason why people are unable to define these things is just there are so many actors in this world. There are so many debates that we have about a lot of different situations and things that exist. This means that you aren't able to say that if someone thinks that in their own world or due to their own reasons that something is immoral, you can't just say this isn't. Yeah. Okay.
But how do you know anything else is true in this instance? Like, how do you know factual claims are true at the same time? By your definition that everything is subjective and things can replay itself. I don't know the...
Because you can see that this goes to the first part. Morality, definitionally, is a social construct. The amount of molecules in the Pacific Ocean is not a social construct. You can count the amount of molecules in that ocean, which means that it is the largest ocean on the Earth, right? You cannot count how much happiness will it bring someone by hitting them. You cannot count how many people. You cannot count if lying to your parents to make sure that you are going to be fine and you are not going to be abused. What lying to your parents actually means for every single person, right? I think this then means that because it is so circumstantial, we cannot say that there is an action that is right. There is an action that anyone can do that is morally wrong. Or what states of the world are good or what states of the world are bad. Perhaps if human was eradicated, we will not have any animal farming, and all of those animals will be happier and will be free. And this is maybe a better moral rule, right? We think that it is impossible. Since it is impossible to know, since no one has any access, and since morality is a social construct, meaning you can't just say God says this exists. I think that most we agree.
Quick thank yous. I know this is mega cringe to do, but I'll just say thank you to the debate community. I think debate is an activity that never exists as an individual, right? It's always something that exists because you're surrounded by lovely people who partner with you, like Karel and Lily last year, people who go to practices or organize tournaments. So, thank all of you. I appreciate it. I'm here because of you. I'm not here because of myself. I'm kind of washed, actually. Okay. Woo! God exists for mechanism. I'm kidding. A couple of things in the speech. The general top half thesis is going to be that reality exists. The fact that reality exists ought to give us credence that there is a high probability that moral facts exist, whether or not those moral facts are fundamentally knowable. I'll do a couple of pieces of framing up the top, and then I'll get into the main extension push. I think the framing will deal with the entirety of the top half, drop them over the debate, and at least give us a 50% chance that we're likely to win this fine. First, then, on some framing. First, this House believes that which means from the perspective of the average reasonable voter, you ought to believe that morality exists. The nature and structure of debate presupposes the existence of goodness and badness, because judges and average reasonable voters cannot structurally exist without a presupposition of goodness and badness. This motion, in and of itself, from the very nature of the existence of this debate, presupposes the existence of morality. And so, though we win the debate, I'm going to sit down. Kidding. Secondly, though, I think it's important to note that this motion and the existence of morality is not by definition anthropocentric. I think this takes up the vast majority of opening government and also opening opposition. Any claim about social relativism, or any claim about the degree to which humans have pre-inclinations towards moral beliefs, presuppose that morality is something that exists because of humans, or requires human observation. There are a couple of problems with this. First, as Karel points out, moral facts will exist independent of the existence of humans. But notably, it's also going to exist independent of the capacity to reason or have sentience. There will still be definition of goodness and badness independent of people being, or conscious experiences being able to observe them. It is true that when an animal breaks its leg in the forest and feels pain, that is a bad action, independent of if it's capable of reasoning about that action, independent if there's a capacity to do that. If you render a planet uninhabitable such that it will never actually have living life on that planet, that is a bad, independent of the fact that there were never conscious beings capable of moving forward to experience it. The very basis of this claim is that we do not need a conscious experience in order to have beliefs for the existence of moral facts. Two, that there is a degree of non-knowability or validity is not a precondition for the existence of morality. This responds directly to opening opposition. Opening opposition's claim is that there is a difference between material facts in the world and moral facts, because material facts have preconditions by which you can validate the claims of those facts, right? So things like you can use math to calculate the size of what constitutes an ocean. The problem is that those claims in and of themselves have pre-existing premises themselves. That is, in order to do the math, you ought to believe that math exists. The very system of all material facts in the universe presuppose, one, that we can believe our sense experience, that is accurate, that have not a grain of the fact of experiencing a reality. So you have to have a preconditioned, presupposed fact in order to exist. But two, you have to apply the laws of logic. The fact that logic gives you credence, you can reason about things like causality, that if X entails Y in one circumstance, X will entail Y in the second circumstance, means that you have to assume a presupposition in order to believe facts. This is going to be the crux of my case, because it's going to say the fact that reality exists gives us credence to believe that there are facts which are fundamentally unknowable and unprovable, but nevertheless we have probabilistic beliefs by which we ought to believe those claims. The second thing is that you can have claims independent of observation. So this is the point that atoms existed in the universe before there were people to view those atoms. Logic and the conditions of logical ordering existed in the universe before there were humans capable of applying logic. I think this is sort of a critical beating claim insofar as we point out that these facts, these things in the universe, do not require verification in order to be true. They do not require observation to be true. They are fundamental facts in the universe, much like moral facts. They do not need to be knowable. This is not a criteria for moral facts. Final claim then is probabilistic. That is, it's impossible to know anything for certain in the universe. All we have to prove that we're in this debate is that there is a higher probability to believe that moral facts exist, that we have a 51% credence, which is more, we actually have a 100% chance of winning this debate. So that probabilistic analysis is sufficient to win this debate. We don't need absolute knowledge to debate. Given that framing, TY from Tsao.
You want them?
Yeah. So you are absolutely correct that these, rule sets existed in theory before. You need to actually prove that this applies to morality and not just say it exists in some cases, and so surely it also exists for morality.
Yeah, so this is my main claim, which is the fact that reality exists ought to give us credence that moral facts exist within that reality. But I'm happy to concede the claim, and I'll point out that Tsao cannot knife in terms of conceding that reality exists. So they can't run a fundamental anti-realist extension. We ought to claim that when reality exists, logic exists, math exists as fundamental claims, independent universe. That's they can't knife them in that characterization. Why then do we apply credence, given this framing, that morality exists in the universe? A couple of fundamental claims. First, I think, as I already pointed out, that there are rules we can assume via observation of other facts which are not themselves fundamentally knowable. That is, we can reason about the existence of black holes without being able to directly measure black holes. We can reason about the rules of math without being able to directly do the math itself. Right? We have observed the universe. So an example of this is the existence of numbers and the constant properties of numbers, like the commutative property or the nature of addition, exist via the observation of the material world, not the observation of the math itself. Nevertheless, we can reason about those facts underpinning it. Why then does reality give us legitimate beliefs that have credence to the existence of moral facts? A couple of things. First, in terms of human convergence. That is, we see that separate societies, completely geographically isolated from one another, another largely converge on some subset of moral facts independent of one another. And our approach here is also that societies independent of humanity-ness would also converge to some subset of moral facts. And the fact that we didn't converge right away is not a challenge to this argument, because our math was wrong for most of history, but nevertheless observations, increasingly accurate observations of reality, gave us convergence to better and better math. We think the morality we have now does not need to be accurate, but nevertheless observations of humanity, societies, and all society are going to converge to those moral facts fundamentally. So the fact that geographically isolated societies converge to some subset of moral facts gives us some credence to believe that those moral facts are in and of themselves correct. Two, that the faculties of reasons that humans are granted with, because they give us beliefs about other parts of the universe, also have credence that they're accurate for moral reasoning. I.e. the fact that logic we have no ability to observe, but nevertheless we have logical reasoning centers in our brain, which can reason about things that are not directly observable, also gives us credence to the fact that we are granted with reason gives us able to morally reason, and therefore there's some observation of those some innate facts. So the existence of moral reasoning faculties in the brain that gives us the capacity to reason about morality gives us credence that there is some existence of morality in the universe independent of those material facts, given that those also exist in logic. Third, that the people who have studied these claims most converge to these facts. That is, over 80% of ethicists believe in moral realism. That is, the people who have spent the most time converge to the most accurate facts. And this is not an appeal to authority, this is an appeal to reason. That is, the more time we spend on scientific observation, we converge to a more accurate picture of the world. The similar claim is here in morality. The basic approach here is that reality exists, ergo morality exists. So proud to propose.
Thanks so much. Emma?
Is this okay, brother? Awesome. Thank you to our house, thank you to the debaters, thank you to the judges, thank you to my partner, thank you to Harvard. Now, you should all follow me on belly. My ad is Maria C. Axe. It's very important. I want you all to listen to me very carefully. This debate asks us to evaluate if moral realism is true. But truth, really, is ultimately about what is futile to believe in. I believe it is true that my parents love me, even if I don't know that, because that makes me happy. I believe it is true that my life is meaningful, because that keeps me alive. You judges should believe it is not true that we are bound by static right or wrong for the rest of the time. You should believe in difference. You should believe in argument. And I know if I were the person faced with this notion about what I should value, I would want to believe and choose that the prison of moral realism is not true. I need to very carefully prove why the actual definition of true is not accuracy or correctness, but rather a utility maximizing choice. And I'm going to just give you the utility impacts. This does not make our opening proposition, who number one says that this motion is about rule sets. Obviously, this can apply to any rule set. And then number two, that they say it's general facts, like for example, genocide is bad. We get opening opposition out of their mind by saying the reason it is bad is because of our definition of truism. Let's talk about truth. Why is truth a utility maximizing decision? I think it is fundamentally important to understand that you don't know what opening opposition's rule set is. You don't know if the rule set is actually that we're all under mass hypnosis. You don't know if the rule set is actually that we're all figments of my imagination. If we don't really know what our reality is, we have constructed schemas for truth. And I'll just apply this to the info slide. We know that the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean, and we know that is true because it seems to fit with what we know about the world, about our transportation, about our navigation, and so it is a good, consistent application. We know all chemistry, for example, is based off of truth because those are the rules that we have that happen to work right now and are useful to believe in to describe phenomena. This is therefore important for one, pragmatic progress, and then number two, psychosocial fulfillment, so we don't devolve into existential crisis all the time and we believe there are some things that we can believe about the world. No, thank you. Why is it impossible or correctness to be the definition of truth. Number one, we just lacked information. We lacked information about edge cases, both experimentally because we haven't tried things yet, and then also temporally as well. Maybe aliens will appear tomorrow, and they just haven't yet appeared today, and that is the reason why the truth of today is that aliens do not exist, but that will not be true for tomorrow. Secondly, academics and government tells us truth is a probability game, but that is fundamentally why it cannot be about correctness. Society could have existed where we were all born as invertebrates and no longer had a spine. Therefore, our truth being that we do not have spines. If we are fundamentally based off of randomness, and if we are fundamentally based off of empathy, it must be true that we can't have a truth about the world, especially given that there's always a possibility of change in the world, of mutation, of evolution, of anything that means that all of our truths could dissolve 1 second and easily. Why is utility maximizing? You know nothing except what is good or bad for you. And I'm willing to take a risk, judges here. I ask you to decide on this debate on whether or not the existence of moral realism you're thinking is good or bad for you. Because the reason is because the rule set must be utility defined, and the opening opposition rule set must be utility defined. Why? Number one, for all the intuition talks that we've heard about in this debate, and thank you, the only thing that we fundamentally landed on is that we seem to have real preferences for what things we would like to believe in and what things we would not like to believe in. And this sometimes congregates with pleasure or pain, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's about those values. But I would say that values themselves give us utility. Love, for example, for making things like pleasure and pain, is still something that is futile to us, and therefore the truth that love is important is a truth we believe in because it is futile to believe in that truth. C.G. Mason, take you in a minute, is that some values build strong utility and some truths are not necessarily about utility. You just know that some things are true. It just can't be true that we know things are true. The reason we have knowledge and the reason knowledge exists is because we needed that knowledge to advance. We needed to have general ideas in society that we could use and progress in one time so that we could grow society, so that we could say the weather exists, we know that to be true, now we can go out and commit our business like we know that the weather is true. That is fundamentally why knowledge existed, and so it actually is a precondition for any of the closing government analysis. Everybody first.
We told you from OG that you can't know anything is true, even stands independent facts, because you cannot trust your senses that reality exists. This means that morality rules that we all seek to employ are just as true as the stands independent facts, because both are true.
Wait, if you don't know anything is true, then why is this notion true? I'm confused about this closing.
Why is utility good?
Here we go. Why is utility good? Number one, it is the only thing that we can ultimately decide for ourselves. And if autonomy is important because that is where our life is premised on the decisions that we make, it must be human to make the most amount of decisions that correlate with ourselves understanding what we should or shouldn't do in society. But intuitions, perhaps you might say, that are utility. The values that we know, the knowledge that we know. Number two, look guys, we do live in a world where you are debate judges making a decision about things that are presumably important to you. And so I would say that the real preferences as judges are that there is some amount of pleasure you find in doing certain activities. That is the reason why you're not just a random walk doing random things on the basis of probability. Why is this good to believe in and we're by our definition of the truth? Opening opposition says empathy. Actually, don't know what really that means. I can show you why it's good to believe that moral realism is not true. Number one, you approach people with the possibility that you're wrong. And I think that is important, number one, so you don't get attacked by them, and the probability that you might get attacked and lose, for example, your life, or lose, for example, your physical capacity, which is definitely a disutility to you because it means that you have less autonomy. Secondly, that you're more likely to be able to make, for example, friends or lovers that are able to help you if you're able to commit all to your initial moral reasoning, which is the reason why you're looking at social nets, for example, in worst case scenarios when bad things happen to you in life. Number three, you can do debate. This opens up things like political science, things like philosophy, which allows you to have more ability to travel. For example, if you don't believe the way that my country raised me and the moral truths that I believe are true are the things that I need to follow for the rest of my life. Lastly, you hedge against societal upheaval, especially in the case of, for example, revolution. Or, for example, in the case of society's just changes, that there are no new moral truths, but you are so stuck with your old moral truths that you're unwilling to change, you're unwilling to adapt, you're unwilling to survive. We think that utility ultimately rules us all because we are stupid creatures, and therefore you should believe that this is not true.
Okay, I'll start with a couple shout-outs. First of all, I want to shout out EDS, the club, talking about foundations of faith, which I will be here about. Special shout-out to Ben Sugars for that, who started being the no mouse. The other group I want to shout out to you, my family today, specifically my partner Rhys, for a wonderful tournament. And finally, I want to shout out Emma Jones, the Loma wife. She's a reason I'm here. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. And let's have a lot of practice. Okay, beginning 3, 2, 1. Panel, you may be very confused, as I am, because you have an OG that is arguing for anti-realism, and you have a CO that is arguing for realism. Let's just be very clear. We are arguing for realism, which is statement that moral claims, moral facts, are something that objectively exists. I don't know if this is separate from whether or not they are empirical, correct? These are different things. Something can be true, whether or not it's empirical, whether it's logically true, these types of things. All we need to prove is that there's a 51% chance that in our world, that moral truths are real. I want to be very clear with something. This is a dichotomous debate by definition, which is to say if moral facts aren't real, they must by definition be anti-real. Which means all you need to adjudicate this round is you think it's more likely that you support real facts, or you think it's more likely that they are anti-real facts. The claims of anti-realism can be very odd and across the board on their side. Well, they don't know because again, it's just about what you have the best information to make a decision on, which is to say, if things, and you don't need to know, as we said, the one right thing out of G, that you don't need to actually know what the correct moral system is, you just need to know that you just need to believe that there is a correct moral system that hopefully one may act. Why do we attempts of anti-realism coming out of opposition not work? We get a couple of claims from the ground. The first claim is of OO, which is broadly a majoritarian claim, and there is such a claim, but majoritarian claim, which is to say that moral facts or lack of facts, morality is simply what we all agree to. I think this is hard to believe for a couple of reasons. One, I think they don't want to answer our blue eyes that show that this isn't true. So one, I think we probably have some reasons. The reason for this is morality is convergence of two things. It is convergence for rationalist reasons, which is to say, cultures across the world, importantly, that never contact each other. We were talking about found Indian scripts, we were talking about claims that came out of Western Europe, we were talking about Chinese doctrine. All have actually come together on common claims such as the golden neuron tree, others that would like to be traits. This is a rational claim. Just to say, the fact that different cultures converge, probably want to get there, is probably wrong. Now, I know that the response that they were trying to grab, which is largely that this is just socially beneficial. That might have worked up until like 1970. But for example, there is no reason to believe that, for example, shrimp stuff is not socially advantageous to any of us. They are a great source of protein, they're easy to capture. There's no reason to extend our moral behaviors to any other thing. In fact, there's not really reasons to not be genocide as long as you are the majoritarian group, right? There's often probably very societally beneficial reasons once, for example, take over a piece of land to think that morality is right. This is why these types of pragmatic explanations do not work in this debate, because they only extend up to the point in which you believe that these things are socially advantageous. Insofar as it's very clear that morality is extended well beyond that, there's no reason to believe that that is actually a reason for moral facts. It clearly stems from something else. The other thing I want to note, and this is important, is that the other form of ethics, which is intuitionalism, also falls under that, which is to say that the fact that none of them want to answer my question, the fact that one speech is started with the condemnation of genocide, but they didn't want to speak against genocide in the question, probably indicates a strong natural intuitions against believing in anti-realism. I think this is also a reason, again, for the 51% confidence that is true. Let's maybe talk on stuff. Yeah, sure.
Okay, our cultures practice lip stretching, doing something immoral, because two separate cultures or 3 or 10 independently decide that was the wrong thing to do.
Say it one more time, just yell at it.
Our cultures practice lip stretching or piercing, doing something morally wrong because 10 other societies independently agreed that is something that's morally painful or bad or wrong to do?
No, of course not. That's the defense of your side, not mine. there's probably an objective truth to whether or not those stretching is moral. I'm not sure what it is, but it exists. That's the entire form of moral realism. You could probably do them, unless they would defend things like slavery, female gender mutilation, they say sort of commonly accepted for a massive majority of human history that are true. The reason for this is important because when you were choosing between two options where it said, do you believe that moral realism is true or anti-realism, you should then adjudicate this on which of these things, one, probably makes more sense, is closer to truth, but also which actually makes the world better. Which is to say, right now we believe in quantum mechanics, because there's our best explanation. There may be a better one out there. And just because this one might be wrong doesn't mean that there isn't an objective, observable correct state of the universe that exists. Same thing with mathematics. Just because mathematics gets updated doesn't mean that there are mathematical truths. We can prove these things. In the same way, we are capable of doing the same things with moral facts, which is to say that we are able to intuit of many different experiences or upon rational conclusion. And the important thing is both major schools of thought and methods have converged upon the same thing. This is why, 72% exactly of ethicists or moral realists is because currently the consensus is there. In the same way that you probably believe that vaccines are effective because a majority of scientists tell you so, that's probably a true statement given the current evidence. And no, evidence doesn't have to be empirical. It can also be logical, which is to say, I believe 1 + 1 = 2, not because I can count my fingers like we tell you, because we can also count trillions, which we can't count our fingers, but because we have logical systems to allow. On Tsao. Tsao makes the ontological problem of claiming utility is the metric and utility is correct. Great. That is a realist claim. You are saying that there is a reason to believe in utility. First of all, you can win on utility. It's totally fine. I would say if utility is the claim, which is a realist claim, so you're a realist, that probably it is better for people not to just get a bunch of their friends together and read a chattel slave if like 51% say it's okay, isn't okay, or is okay. That's probably bad on utilitarian grounds. But more importantly, neither side, another opposition to you, has explained their ground for morality. And importantly, this is key because they have to make the decision between the two. Decide whether or not a statement is true and that caught a statement, either is it light or is it dark outside. You have to make a decision on those things. One of the three. You can't have an I don't know stance on those types of things. It's either true or it's not. Insofar as we give you many reasons through the observation of the universe, through your existence in the universe, through the fact that we seem to be able to modify our positions over time, irrespective of humans, that we should probably believe in these things. All these things lead us to a more than 51% chance that moral realism is, as of right now, the most correct moral form of reasoning. And therefore, that is what you should adjudicate. I understand that there's messiness in this debate. But the reason for that is, yes, it would be harder to articulate where moral facts come from, but it's harder to not. For the third time, hopefully the last time, very proud of ours.
Thanks so much. Output.
Can everyone hear me? The motion asks us to consider what is true, but the issue with this debate so far is that there is no objective truth. As a society, we decide on truths because it is utility maximizing for us to believe that those things are true. Not because there is some way in our tiny human minds to actually know any objective truth about the world. We have decided that it is factually true that New Delhi is the capital of India because it is utility maximizing for us to organize ourselves into countries and for those countries to have capitals from which they can politically administrate their country. If someone really wants to slap me, we will all witness it and decide that is factually true because it is most utility maximizing for us to believe what we see with our eyes because anything else will lead us into a permanent existential spiral where we all just become like Descartes and we're like, do other people even exist or do we just all live in a giant fucking simulation? That is why we believe that anything in the world is true because we see truth as a utility maximizing process because we see it as something that is done in order for us to most conveniently live our lives and construct the rest of our belief systems on it. This is important for the debate because it shows you how you should actually evaluate the question of this debate. It is not about what is true in the broad sense of whatever the fuck truth might mean. It is rather what we as a society should believe is true. It is what is more beneficial for people to generally believe. It is what is better for the average individual to believe in, whether they believe in the fact that there is moral realism or whether they believe in the fact that there is not. What are the reasons why the average individual in society as a whole should not believe in moral realism? Firstly, because it makes us more empathetic as people. It makes us believe that sometimes our morals could be wrong. It makes us ask people who do things that we consider morally, objectively bad, why they did it. It helps us hear out the other side. But secondly, it is the only thing that allows morals to evolve over time, which every team in this debate agrees is a good thing. Because if society permanently held on to whatever they conceived as their version of moral realism and was never able to consider another version of moral realism because morals are absolute and morals at the point at which you believe them cannot be changed because there are some independent facts about morality, we will never be able to evolve as a society and come to believe that things like slavery are wrong, that things like feminism are important. What is the response to all of this? The first implicit response coming out of God is that truth should be based on what is probabilistically true. This is untrue because, unfair to say, because all facts can be broken down to fundamental assumptions that we have about life that are probabilistically unprovable. We have to believe, for example, that the world exists, that human perception is real, which are all things that are fundamentally unprovable. So clearly it is not a probabilistic mathematical evaluation of things, but rather something that is subjectively based on our utility, which is that it is good for us to believe that life is real, that the world is true. The next thing you hear from Karel is that realism is an objective claim as well on morality, so therefore we're crossing the house. No, we are making an objective claim on what is true, which is a separate question from what is moral. We can have a claim on how we decide truth without saying that it is the morally correct way. It is just the way that it is done, and it is the way that our sheer definition of what the word truth means sees truth as, so therefore we are not crossing the house. Look, I think that if we buy our framing of this debate, we win automatically, but I'm a little concerned with the confused looks on judges' faces, so I will still rebut independently. Before I do that, I'll take one.
Wait, I still think our argument about Descartes that nothing is true means that this is as true as the facts that I just gave. It still stands. Why is it nothing is true?
If nothing is true, then we cannot prove that moral realism is true. So we have to believe that something is true, i.e. the more utility maximizing thing is true, and the more utility maximizing thing is to believe that moral realism is not true. I hope that makes sense. What does CG say? CG says that there are facts that are fundamentally unknowable and unprovable, and therefore it is better for us to believe that if society converges on those facts, they must therefore be true, and that geographically isolated societies are all converged on these same moral facts, and they must be true. The first response to this is I'm sorry, but then Rhys actually did need to give you those 4 reasons for why God exists. Because geographically isolated societies have all converged on the fact that there is some larger spiritual being or set of beings. Anthropologists conclude that most societies believe in some sort of spiritual conception of the world, i.e. there is something out there that is beyond just us, but there is no way for us to know that that's actually true. So clearly, simply because geographically isolated societies converge on something independently doesn't automatically make it something that we consider true. No one in this room will agree that God being real is a stands independent fact simply because geographically isolated societies have converged. But secondly, societies have converged on many moral truths that turned out to be wrong, right? They've converged 100, 200 years ago all on the moral truth that women are men's property, but then we re-converged away from it. So clearly, Rhys says maybe we are in the process of converging towards some final truth. Here's the issue, right? If we're into math, maybe it doesn't converge, right? They never prove to you that we're not just infinitesimally getting closer and closer to something that doesn't exist and doesn't ultimately exist a convergible endpoint. We're on a path that's completely off the X and Y axis, and therefore we're on the 3D plane, right? So they never prove to you that we are actually converging towards this convergible truth because they need to prove that the truth of the world and the truth of morality doesn't diverge in the first place. So simply because we have all converged on the same thing doesn't mean that we have all converged on something that is fundamentally convergible. The last thing I that's fair, but also just because things are unprovable doesn't make them automatically true either. It is unprovable that CG wins this debate, it's also unprovable that OG wins this debate, and all of these things are unprovable until deliberations happen, but both facts don't both be true just because they're both unprovable, because they're fundamentally contradictory. What does OG tell you in this debate? OG says that there are fundamental common sensations we all feel, and these sensations are universally truthfully bad. There's a gaping hole in this argument, which is that most human beings probably have common sensations, but they don't prove that these sensations are commonly and objectively bad. That's to say, we all commonly feel pain, but they cannot prove to you that pain is commonly bad insofar as some people like pain. But secondly, the commonality of sensations shall make something a stance-independent fact. DPM's logic is that all of us would find slapping people morally bad. This is fair, but also most people in the world would find that God exists, so therefore it doesn't make that a stance-independent fact. For all of these reasons, I'm incredibly proud to win this.
Thanks all for a great round.